More than 40 countries depend on the US for liquefied natural gas, LNG for short. So when Biden recently announced that he was putting a freeze on certain future LNG exports coming from the US, it caused a bit of a stir.
It was a mistake.
I think it was the right decision.
We went to Louisiana, where the nation's soon-to-be biggest LNG terminal has been affected by the move, and to Germany, which is now dependent on US LNG. What's the impact of Biden's decision? We dig deep to find out in this episode of Transforming Business. Let's start in Louisiana. The small parish of Cameron is nestled between 4 separate wildlife refuges and the Gulf of Mexico. The area is home to 5,000 people, as well as hundreds of species of birds, reptiles, and other fauna and flora. It's also home to 3 LNG terminals.
Right next to me here, you see Venture Global. They're on the other side of the Calcasieu River.
Cameron resident John Allaire can see and smell them from his property. John is a retired environmental engineer. He's lived here for 25 years.
They want to take this whole area over off of my property now. They're not allowed to be on my property, but right next door it's very similar.
Visible from John's property is the proposed future location of a 4th terminal, Calcasieu 2, or CP2 for short. CP2 will be the biggest LNG export terminal in the U.S., with a capacity to export 24 million tons of the fossil fuel per year. That's according to its owner, Venture Global. It's one of 17 future LNG projects that now face an uncertain future due to Biden's decision, which pauses approvals for pending and future applications to export LNG to countries that have a free trade agreement with the U.S. But back to this later. LNG provides heating and electricity to millions of people around the world. The U.S. started exporting it less than 10 years ago. Last year, it shipped out 86 million tons of it, an amount it expects to double in the next 3 years. The U.S. is the world's top exporter, delivering gas to these countries. Germany is one of them. It boosted LNG imports after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which we'll talk about in a moment. But first, what's behind Biden's decision? There are a few hypotheses. A big one is that environmental activists put pressure on the Biden administration. In its decision, the White House called climate change the existential threat of our time. LNG is a fossil fuel, which emits greenhouse gases contributing to global warming, and which the U.S. has pledged to move away from. Biden says he also wants to protect communities living near export facilities, like Cameron Parish, where John Allaire lives, which is dealing with the environmental impacts of LNG production, like pollution and land erosion.
But this is the clay that's eroding away from the old chenier that used to be down here. Again, this was fully treed.
LNG infrastructure has left a mark on the land. This muddy beach used to be a sandy one before Venture Global dredged the river to make space for LNG tankers docking in the marina. 8,000 kilometers from Louisiana, on the German island of Rügen, LNG is a hot topic too. According to S&P Global, 82% of its liquefied natural gas comes from the U.S. The European nation now has 3 fully operational import terminals, and a 4th has just received its first tanker here. Opinions on Rügen are mixed. To build all these terminals from the ground at once, I think is the wrong decision for the future. I have nothing against it. We obviously need a little bit of gas, wherever it comes from. It doesn't come out of the ground on its own. In Germany, we don't have any gas. Despite fierce opposition from organizations and residents in Binz, a small town on the Baltic coast, the German government went ahead with plans to build the LNG terminal. Its construction, and the 3 others like it, were fast-tracked after Russia invaded Ukraine. Germany was keen to reduce its heavy reliance on Russian energy. Building LNG regasification terminals allowed it to process exports coming from other sources, like the U.S., which some residents and tourists here question. I believe that we don't need the LNG terminals. That's also the opinion of some economists. Because of that, I think they shouldn't build them here. Germany's federal government acknowledges this. Economic Minister Robert Habeck says additional terminals will provide Germany with more than it needs, but that this surplus is what will keep the country safe in the event of sabotage to some of its energy infrastructure. And Germany also sees natural gas as a transition fuel to move away from other higher-emitting fossil fuels like coal and oil, and as an important backup for when wind and solar farms don't produce enough electricity. But this is also central to another reason why critics oppose Biden's move. They argue that as a transition fuel, LNG is key for import nations in the process of vamping up renewable energy efforts.
Slashing supplies doesn't create more demand or capacity of renewables.
Brenda Schaefer is an energy expert at the US Naval Postgraduate School.
So for all the, sort of so-called environmental activists that thought they had a big win here, they're actually bringing to higher demand for coal and fuel oil.
But some experts say LNG brings its own baggage. 80% of natural gas in the U.S. comes from fracking, a process that relies on forcing chemicals underground using high pressure. Fracking has been linked to contaminated groundwater, increased seismic activity, and the release of methane, a potent greenhouse gas.
It's more than 100 times more powerful than carbon dioxide for the time it's in the atmosphere.
Robert Howarth is an Earth System scientist and professor at Cornell University.
My research suggests that at least a third of that, maybe half of that total global increase is methane emissions from fracked shale gas in the United States.
One of Howarth's recent studies asserts that natural gas might actually be dirtier than coal. Consider all the energy it takes to drill wells, frack the shale rock, liquefy the gas, and transport it via massive tankers, which are often old and inefficient.
You add it all up, and for LNG, under the best case scenario, again, using conservative assumptions on emissions from shale gas and using the best, most modern tankers, LNG's 25% larger footprint than coal overall for greenhouse gas emissions.
Despite the environmental concerns about LNG, some experts believe Biden is making a political play aimed at a certain demographic ahead of the 2024 presidential election.
This was sort of, I think, was trying to appeal to these younger voters that for them, fossil fuels are evil, and they're very concerned about the role of fossil fuels in climate change.
Even some of Biden's fellow Democrats aren't too thrilled with the decision, worrying it will eliminate U.S. jobs and stunt domestic economic growth.
It is in America the underpinning of our manufacturing renaissance.
Mary Landrieu was Louisiana's Democratic senator for 18 years. She's now an energy consultant who advises Venture Global, owner of the CP2 terminal.
Natural gas is critical to helping us build our steel and cement and AI facilities, data facilities, car companies, tech companies.
Let's go back to the impact of the freeze. Biden's move does not threaten current supplies to countries like Germany. But while it remains in place, only countries with a free trade agreement, like those marked here in orange, will be able to benefit from supply increases. That doesn't include Europe, which got half of its LNG gas from the US last year. Although, even back in 2022, analysts agreed that the US LNG industry had the capacity to boost supply to Europe until 2030, without building any new infrastructure. So what's the impact of Biden's LNG pause? Well, it's put a spotlight on the debate about the role LNG should play in our future, a debate where politicians, the energy industry, economists, and climate scientists have differing points of view. Germany may not need more LNG, but wants it as insurance for its energy security and as transition fuel. And those concerned about its impact on climate change and the environment say it isn't worth it. It locks countries into a dependency on a fossil fuel, which could be even dirtier than it's purported to be, potentially for decades. U.S. projects that have already been approved won't be impacted by Biden's decision, which is a temporary pause, not a ban. And even with the freeze, the US will still be able to triple its exports in the next 5 to 7 years. What do you think? Is temporarily limiting LNG expansion the right move or not? Does it even make much of a difference? Let us know in the comments.